My Lords, I signed the Noble Lord Frost's amendments to probe the ways that we can make this bill more transparent to the public. That was my main driver. I believe in plain speaking. The public, I think, deserve... Yes, I know. I thought about that line, but anyway, the public deserve to know what this bill involves. And as it happens, I think the Noble Lord, Lord Frost's wording adds clarity. The Noble Lord's proposal is to replace assistance to end their own life with medical help to commit suicide by provision to lethal drugs. Now, that wording is factually accurate, even if it makes you gulp. But the reason it makes one gulp is because it's factually accurate and we don't often recognise what's being advocated here. And I think there is a danger that the bill's terminology creates ambiguity rather than clarity, and I think it's important that we're frank and that we're open. Now, why use the word suicide? As has already been explained, the bill does need to amend the Suicide Act precisely in order to carve out the legal space to allow this type of assisted suicide, as mentioned in the bill, to be within the law. That's accurate. But I am wary, of course, of having a culture war over the word suicide. And I have to say that I use the term assisted dying all the time, right? So it's not as though you have to be called out for hypocrisy here. Because I am aware of the fact that suicide as an issue is far too serious and tragic to be glib about or to have a kind of verbal ping-pong. But on the other hand, I'm worried that avoiding the word suicide in this debate and actually making it verboten might actually desensitise public debate. Because let's be honest, language choice can influence opinion. Assisted dying sounds softer, more palatable, more sympathetic. And it is interesting that evidence shows that support for assisted dying changes if you call it assisted suicide. It drops significantly when the terms are plainly defined. And of course, some may flinch at the words used by the Noble Lord, Lord Frost, medical help to commit suicide with lethal drugs. And as I've said, it's hard to accept that. You think, what? There's going to be a complete change in the way medicine is operated, and your medics could hand you poison and lethal drugs. Yes, is the answer. And I think when people hear that phrase, it might hit them what a fundamental shift that means for medical professions and so on. And that's exactly why a number of us are not prepared to just nod this bill through, because it's perfectly reasonable to completely disagree with what I've just said. But I want everyone to know what the bill's about and why it's a very big change in our society in all sorts of ethical discussions. And the public deserve to know that, and therefore we should be as clear as possible. Now, I do recall from the first day of committee and subsequently, but particularly on the first day, there was a lot of tut-tutting and reprimands. A lot of people being shouting at. When peers used the term assisted suicide, there was a lot of people standing up saying, you can't say that. But you can't say that as, you're just being emotional, manipulative, and so on. But I do think that clear language promotes, as I say, promotes public and patient understanding, and I'm advocating, in a way, a patient-centric approach rather than a euphemistic approach, which could arguably be seen as an act of misinformation in some instances. But also, I would like to ask the Noble Lords who are sponsoring or supporting the bill why they're so defensive, because Digitas actually offers physician-assisted suicide. And in fact, the World Federation of the Right to Die Societies talks about assisted suicide in terms of describing the distribution of the drugs that will cause the death of a person. The term assisted suicide is used in Switzerland, Austria, and the Netherlands. So, that's what it is. That's what I think we should call it. Now, the final thing is that people, we are told, who are dying are not committing suicide. And she's in her seat, the noble lady Baroness Hayter has consistently said suicide is different to assisted dying. It can't be assisted suicide because people who want assisted dying are already dying, and therefore they can't commit suicide. That's more or less it. You're dying anyway, so you're not being driven by despair, but this is an active, positive choice. Although so far in the bill we wouldn't know that because we're not allowed to ask motives. But anyway, nonetheless, you know, you're driven by that. But there are two problems, it seems obvious to me, in relation to this. If a person is dying and goes to the trouble of organising to obtain and ingest lethal substances, poison, that is suicide. That is an accurate use of language. It's not a moral conduct, it's just a point. By removing the word suicide from the discussion, though, there's another danger, because advocates of this bill, without saying the S word, nonetheless argue that assistance in ending one's life can be, in certain circumstances, dignified, a positive choice, a happy release, and I'm afraid that normalises taking one's own life. And even if you don't use the S word, that is the sort of thing I associate with the propaganda on pro-suicide, pro-self-harm sites, rather than associated with a bill such as this. So I would suggest that the normalisation and even the glamorisation of taking one's life as a happy end result is not something we should do. And therefore I'd at least like to call it suicide so people might gulp and think again.
My Lord, I too